You may wonder why it is that so many people think we are on the verge of a civil war or that we are potentially in one just in the precursor phase. I'd like to bring your attention to an article from the Post-Millennial. YouTuber Ethan Klein calls for bombing of NRA conference. Klein prefaced his calls for violence by promoting sales of his new shirts, which read "End Gun Violence." Now, shortly after saying he wanted someone to bomb the NRA conference, he then walks it back. But I do think there is some important context as to what he was talking about and why he said it. I don't think that he was joking. I think he knows that he wasn't joking. And he even said he took it a little too far and then later said, well, he was joking. In fact, when he called for the bombing of the NRA building, his wife says, yes. Yes. Now, in the full context of the video, it appears that one of his editors or someone working there waves to him like, stop. He looks over and then he says, okay, took that one a little too far. Then he goes on to repeatedly just dwell on the issue, saying things like kill them with kindness. And that's what I meant. And love bomb. YouTube has taken down the video. Now, I don't care for the most part for these kind of internet drama videos. And it's kind of pointless that I say it because I end up doing them periodically anyway. But I think this one is important because following the suspension of his channel for 1 week, following his call for the bombing of the NRA building, he is now saying that he is getting death threats and waves of anti-Semitism flying his way. There is no de-escalation here. There's none. Now, I'm going to be perfectly candid. Ethan Klein, I think, is a bad person. I mean, it's not saying much. I'm not trying to drag or insult him by saying that. He recently, literally this morning, as I made a comment about not believing his apology, put up an out-of-context clip of me to make it seem like I'm advocating for private ownership of nuclear weapons. Most of you who follow me know what my actual argument was, that the Second Amendment protects the right to own everything, because it always had. And at no point did we just decide some weapons were off limits. I mean, some people do, and they make those assumptions. My point is that when the Second Amendment was codified, we had corsairs and privateers. These were privately owned warships. It was all legal, and you could have cannons. Cannons at the time, artillery. This was the pinnacle of siege weaponry, and you were allowed to own it. Why did that principle change? At what point did we amend the Constitution to say you could not keep and bear arms? No, in fact, it's gone the other direction. Since the late 80s, or since the 80s, gun rights have continually expanded, and now we have 36 states with permitless open carry and 25 with constitutional carry. That is to say, if you want to make the argument that today we can't have certain weapons because they're too powerful, even though you could have the most powerful weapons back when they codified the Second Amendment, it makes no sense, especially considering in the Supreme Court's interpretation of 2A, our rights to own guns have expanded. Well, here's the story from May 28th, before the weekend, but I want to show you the updated context. Many of you probably have seen the story, but for those that haven't, YouTuber Ethan Klein, called for the NRA conference in Texas to be bombed. Quote, saw there was a big protest outside the NRA meeting, which was good. Do we have any insight into what they're actually talking about there at the NRA meeting that's today in Texas? Someone should bomb that building, he said. Yeah, that's horribly wrong. I don't even know if I'm allowed to quote that he said it, but I think I need to. Maybe YouTube won't be too happy about that. We'll see what happens. But I will add, this clip cuts off what he immediately said following, which I'm now going to show you. Because, so here we can see YouTube's removed the video. This was over the weekend. And I want to show you what I think is really important about this video. Let me stress, I don't care about podcast drama. I don't care about, these guys, many of these prominent podcasters, they get their clicks by doing interpersonal drama. We're getting a little bit in there, sure. But I just want to make sure we keep the focus on, or at least the context you retain is the escalation in the conflict. I want to play this for you, but I want to make sure this is clear because this is what's important about what's happening with Ethan Klein. The one thing I think that is keeping this country together right now is boomers and some Gen Xers. Boomers, for the most part, unified in their political views. not completely. They have some wedge arguments. Gen Xers, similar but dividing. Millennials, completely split to the point where, Ethan Klein will call for the bombing of a building, walk it back. Millennials on the right will take that, cut out the part where he walked it back, post a video saying that's what's important. Then I, not showing the video at all, criticizing Ethan Klein. Ethan Klein would then do the same in kind to me, taking a clip out of context to create the worst possible interpretation, which results in anger and animosity. I'm not worried about the petty drama of this guy. I am worried about crazy people who believe crazy things. And of course, Ethan, with his massive influence, did not tell people the full context. I always try to do so. And you know what? Maybe the problem is it's impossible. Maybe I get it wrong too. But I can show you the full context, and I can break down where I believe on a very large podcast with millions of subscribers, this was not a joke. And by all means, give Ethan all of the credit you want. I did a segment last week where I legitimately confronted his arguments. I did not insult him. But this is what happens. There is a need among all of these tribalists for escalation. So this is how it began.
I literally don't know what to do, and I feel hopeless.
Okay, we're not getting. Okay. I'll just have to. I got a new audio setup. Hila, his wife, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says, "I literally don't know what to do, and I feel hopeless." Let me just try and play it.
What to do, and I feel hopeless. I feel like there's zero hope.
There's zero hope.
Yeah, I don't know. I was wondering. So there was a big protest outside the NRA meeting, which was good. Do we have any insight into what they're actually talking about there at the NRA meeting that's today in Texas?
Okay, I'm going to stop it before he says the actual threat. But his wife was saying, I feel like there's no hope. He says, do we have any idea what's happening there? Someone should. Yeah. So let me see if I can. I don't want to play the clip. All right, here we go. She says, right after he calls for violence.
Okay, I'll roll that back.
Roll that back immediately.
Immediately says, okay, I'll roll that back.
Violence.
No violence.
Let me.
Can we cut back?
I got a little carried away there.
He says he got a little carried away.
The building, all right.
Nobody bombed the building. He takes it back.
I took it a little too. I got a little passionate there.
Now, here's the important part. He got a little passionate there, walk it back. The end result is that this video is taken down. I think his wife is pretty stressed by it. She said, I feel like there's no hope. He said, somebody should. And then she said, It's almost like this is one of the problems we have with escalation. I think probably the only reason he walked it back is because they knew they were heading into banned territory, which has resulted in them getting suspended. Ethan said, conservatives got triggered over jokes I told and mass reported me. I got banned for a week and the episode was removed. If only they cared about dead kids as much as they do jokes. So I want to say sorry. Sorry y'all are such pathetic snowflakes. F the NRA and F Abbott. All right. Those weren't jokes, dude. You said you got carried away and a little too passionate. I don't care about what he has to say for me, and I don't care to do back and forth BS. I really do find funny in all of this. The things that matter very little when it comes to the drama YouTube podcaster stuff. And I'll pause real quick. Ethan Klein is a podcaster. Podcasts have more influence, but YouTube is as well. It's completely nonsensical issues. Like the Young Turks did a video where it's like Tim Pool says conservatives are less ugly than liberals or something. And it was like, I was citing 3 different studies and I was like, that's really interesting. I wonder if that's privilege. They don't care to actually get to the core of the arguments. They're just screaming into the wind because it gets them clicks and gets them followers. Now, I think Ethan Klein, you see what happens with a lot of these people is that they get, we need to come up with like a word that explains this. What happens is you take one person, you put them in a room, and they'll sit there, and that's it. They maybe read. They won't do much. You take another person and put them in the room. Now they start bouncing an idea back and forth between each other. One person says the NRA is bad. The other person then enables or amplifies and says you're right. I do think the NRA is bad too. They keep bouncing this idea back and forth, and among themselves exacerbate and grow this seed of hatred. There's a video I often cite from CGP Grey called This Video Will Make You Angry that explains it really well, where he mentions that the different tribal groups online often don't argue with each other. They argue among themselves about how bad the other is. And that's what we saw with the rise of the culture war, and now it's culminating in this. When you have an audience that feeds on this rage and an escalation, you get carried away. It wasn't a joke. It was the next logical step in what Ethan Klein has said. And he needs to say something more. He can't say the same thing over and over again. You've probably heard me talk about how the media did it with Trump. You write an article saying Trump is a racist, you'll get 1 million clicks. You can't write the same article twice, but you can't now write Trump isn't racist, so what do? In order to get that feeling back, to get that drive, you need to escalate the rhetoric over and over and over again to the point where you're saying Donald Trump is literally worse than Hitler, which is insane, of course, but they did say that. For someone like Ethan Klein, who's continually riling up his base and pandering to the tribal outrage, F the NRA, F the NRA, he needs to bring it to its next logical conclusion. I think that's a sign of, it's almost like a high skill NPC-like behavior. Me personally, yeah, I won't play that. I'm not going to pretend like I'm perfect, but getting to the point where you would advocate for something like that, no. I have scruples and I am well aware of reasonable boundaries and people getting carried away. And plus, I just typically think most people are not researched enough. I'll put it this way. You know, one of the things that protects me from flying off into, rages like this is that I think I'm smarter than a lot of these people. I don't think I'm the smartest person in the world. I don't think that, I think many people are smarter than me. My point, what I'm trying to say is I don't trust them. That's it. I'm making a joke about being arrogant, but, truth be told, I am a little bit. But what I mean to say is I don't trust everybody. I don't trust, when they say, did you see X? I'll be like, I don't know if I believe you. So you're not going to get me to come out and drive this escalation, but this is what we are seeing. Ethan then tweeted, I want to make it clear that I don't advocate for violence of any kind. That is obvious to anyone that watched the segment and not just the 10-second clip that was used to misdirect attention. Republicans are now the party of dead children, and nothing can misdirect from that. Okay. See, this is what I took issue with, and this is why I quoted this and said, I was following until that last part. Republicans are now the party of dead children. Republicans are banning guns. This is evidence, in my opinion, that many of these high-profile left personalities, 2.3 million followers, they're not serious people and they're not making serious arguments. And what Ethan is doing is actually driving us towards a civil war. I'm not saying him exclusively. I'm not saying him to a great degree. I'm saying it's just a grain of sand in a heap. As Gen Xers, when the boomers age out and millennials take over industry, this sentiment will be persistent. And it is. But it's going to be persistent among those who wield disproportionate amounts of power. Right now, one thing, as I mentioned, the thing that I think, one thing that's keeping us from civil war is that boomers are still here. Boomers have a disproportionate amount of wealth and power relative to generations past. Millennials have an extremely disproportionately low amount of wealth and power. If someone like Ethan Klein, who is wealthy and powerful, had the traditional level of wealth and power of, say, the boomers when they're at the same age, we'd be looking at some really crazy and dangerous circumstances. But boomers are holding on to that. And so it's holding back what's to come. Once Ethan Klein is in his 40s and 50s and is a leader of industry, and he almost is, he's a large influence, these ideas just spit on the Republicans as the party of dead children, irrespective of facts. And that's what you're going to see. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what drives the hatred. So what we do over at Timcast is I'll make the point to say leftists are pro-gun. Say it all the time. I'll often be like, the left, wait, I'm sorry, I got to stop myself. It's just a force. It comes out. Leftists, I'm sorry. Leftists are pro-gun. Karl Marx said, under no pretext should the workers surrender their arms and ammunition. Any attempt to seize it should be frustrated with force, if necessary, something like that. It's liberals. These establishment corporate liberals that are all about that. I try to make sure we get that point across because I don't care if you're left economically or whatever. I care if you're fascistic, like you think only the government should have guns versus the people. I think the people should have them. I don't like the government, and I don't understand how you can say defund the police but arm them at the same time and disarm the population. Seems to make not very much sense. But anyway, Ethan comes out and he makes this point that he doesn't advocate for violence of any kind. Well, he said he got carried away. So he did advocate for very extreme violence, in fact, an act of terror, but then walked it back because he thought he went too far. That's not a joke, and that was literal advocacy. My response is that Ethan should have just said what he said on the show. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking, it just blurted out. It's completely inappropriate. But to go on and say Republicans are the party of dead children is the real point. I don't care what you think about Ethan Klein. I don't care what Ethan Klein thinks about me. I care about where this train is going. And the train seems to be heading in a direction where the following response from Ethan is just to escalate. It's all escalation. He tweeted at Donald Trump Jr. Remember when your dad inspired an insurrection that killed 6 people? Donald Trump Jr. posted, Ethan Klein has 2.9 million subs on YouTube and has made multiple encouragements for violence and death against conservatives. He didn't just say to bomb the NRA building. He advocated for attacking Governor Greg Abbott and physical confrontation. Well, I'll be careful with that last one. But he said to stick, this is what's being reported. I want to be careful. Stick a wheel in the spokes of Abbott's wheelchair and then no one can, so he'd fall out. Like direct physical action and attacks against him. Now let's get personal here, but not in the sense that I care all that much. Ethan said, if you want to know how deranged Tim Pool is, just watch this. Thank you for shouting me out, Ethan. I said, I appreciate that Ethan did not extend to me the same courtesy he demanded of the right. He cut out where I said, and most people think that's wrong and we would need to amend the Constitution. Privateers were legal when it was written and they could flatten coastal cities. This is important. To Ethan's defense, the video that's being circulated by people on the right doesn't include him saying, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have said that. When I was first sent the clip by everyone saying, look what he said, oof, I don't fall for the Covington BS, guys. So I had conservatives send me this clip of Ethan Klein calling for bombing the NRA building, and it stops right after he says it. I said, oh, really? So I went and I found the full clip and I watched it, and he immediately says, I went too far, don't do that. For like the next 30 seconds to a minute, he's like, peaceful protest in Minecraft, all of that stuff. It doesn't change the base context of it. He got carried away and he called for violence. He did. He said he got carried away. He did walk it back. Those are all true. In my opinion, I think dude just went too far. Now, as for my argument, which he posted, where I just talk, it's me saying,
the Second Amendment protects your right to own nuclear weapons.
I said the Second Amendment protects your right to own nuclear weapons. And then I was asked, what about biological weapons? Absolutely. Delivery mechanism. Yes, you better believe it. And in the greater conversation following the 16-second clip, I said, effectively what the conversation was, essentially what it was, is that, as I mentioned, Corsairs existed. The governments of that era would contract privately owned warships to go and disrupt the supply lines. This was full-scale warfare with the most powerful weapons at the time. The founding fathers hired people who had these things. They knew all about it. And they said, you could have it. It wasn't illegal. You could own cannons, and you still can. Why would that principle have changed? It hasn't. The argument could be that the Supreme Court might say we are never going to allow that interpretation. But just because they don't want to allow it doesn't mean the interpretation wasn't it. Like that wasn't the interpretation. Long story short, I said, I think most people would agree individuals shouldn't have nuclear weapons, and we're going to have to amend the Constitution. Funny. It's almost like my argument was in favor of limitations on the right to keep and bear arms. Arms being a reference to all armaments. Strange how Ethan Klein doesn't include that context. I don't care that he didn't. It's a lot of childish nonsense. We try to avoid a lot of the interpersonal drama. I would say we do a small amount periodically, but we try to, I only think when it really matters, when it has a bigger impact or speaks to the larger conflict at hand. The main issue I want to get to is, I will accept, here we go, Tim Pool, Ethan Klein talking at each other. I also thought it probably would be a stupid segment to do because I wonder how many people really care about Ethan Klein. But the real point, Ethan Klein is a very prominent millennial with millions of subscribers, followers, and tremendous influence. When he says things like this, it's important because it shows you where we are headed. We are headed towards a future where millennials will be at each other's throats to an extreme degree, where Ethan Klein, a perfect example of this, will demand you show the full context of my clip, but then not show the full context of my clip. But the point here is not to say that I'm angered that he didn't. I fully expect him to do this and more. I expect him and the Young Turks and anybody else to pull up more clips and take them all out of context. It's what they do. The point is, for those that watch them, they are being riled up into a frenzy. My thing is, we got to stop gun violence. People have a right to keep and bear arms. We should not have only the police who are armed. The police in Uvalde kept the parents out of the building, using their arms and authority, and then did nothing. So I think we've got a problem of government. I think we have a problem of establishment politicians embracing fascistic tendencies and policies or otherwise. But ultimately what ends up happening is, right now you have politics as pop culture. Ethan Klein is not a political guy. He doesn't know a lot about politics. He said so himself, and I'm not saying that as a dig. He was a comic entertainment guy who made a podcast probably because he saw the way the winds were blowing. He used to do these clips on YouTube. They were funny, and he would make jokes. He got a lot of followers. He launched a podcast as the podcast era began. He transferred his influence from comedy and entertainment into politics. He hosted people like Jordan Peterson. As politics began to turn, he also then turned with the tides. He saw the way the wind was blowing and embraced leftist establishment politics with people like Hassan Piker and then condemning people like Jordan Peterson. This is a guy who turns at the slightest breeze. He's a businessman, and he is a social media personality first and foremost. I'm kind of different. I got started in activism, doing protesting and working at nonprofits. I got into this from the political angle, having spent my entire life reading news and talking politics and discussing the war and being on the ground doing activism, then working at nonprofits fundraising to help solve these problems before going on the ground at Occupy Wall Street. The entire trajectory of my life has been around politics and then into the media. So there's two different worlds clashing here. One is politics has become pop culture. So the only thing that matters then is if you're an entertainer and your goal is to produce content, your approach is always going to be maximum audience. Then you have where I come from. Boots on the ground activism protesting the war, boots on the ground activism working for several nonprofits on behalf of many such as the ACLU, Greenpeace, the Human Rights Campaign, organizations called Per Groups, and homeless shelters. And immediately following that direct on the ground activism as a career, I went to Occupy Wall Street. Started filming, which pushed me into a media space. Being in the media space, but coming from politics has always been my passion, and I will always approach it from a political angle, an activist angle, in such that my issue is how do we solve these problems, not how do I maximize audience. If I wanted to maximize audience, there's a lot of different things I would have done, things that I could be saying about Donald Trump or otherwise. There are many people who launched podcasts after me. I've been doing this for 10 years who have way bigger followings. And it's because there's the entertainment angle or the news and media angle. Politics has become pop culture. And because of that, you are seeing a dramatic escalation. When Bears fans fight with Packers fans, it's sports, but riots and fights break out. Not all that much, but soccer hooligans, whoa. People fighting over soccer can get pretty crazy. But we have riots over sporting events. Take that rage and anger and apply it to the new pop culture that is politics, and things start getting wacky, weird, and crazy. All of a sudden, I have someone like Ethan Klein, who probably knows very little about politics and history, engaging in a political space, Twitter, for instance, with someone like me who's been doing activism for 20 years and then getting into journalism and activism for 15 or so, and getting into journalism in the past 10 plus years. Now I think it's going on 11 years. In what reality does this pan out well, right? When you have pop culture elements embracing tribal politics instead of tribal celebritas, you will get chaos. So what we end up with is Ethan Klein will demand you put him in full context, but then take others out of context. He will turn what should have been an apology into an attack on Republicans in the NRA because his goal is to entertain for his audience. None of that is being said as a dig. I'll entertain anyone's politics or arguments all day and night. Ultimately, I think for you and I, this drama stuff is petty. But in the bigger picture, my concern is if people like Ethan and many other conservative millennials are embracing this kind of tribal escalation without thought because it's pop culture as politics, we're going to fight. I hope it isn't the case, but people need to understand how politics is influenced by generational shifts. People seem to think that the politics must escalate. No. What happens is the generations escalate. When teachers go for young children and try to groom them and get them to embrace certain ideas, those kids grow up further left. So what's happening now is children today are being indoctrinated. And as they grow, they are further and further away. The children of someone like Ethan who probably grew up, he was an edgy teenager doing edgy comedy. He's apologized for a lot of it because it's offensive now. So he's going to raise his kids with that ethos. Those kids are not going to grow up more centered like he did. He's in the center. He moves in a direction. His kids will grow up already in the direction and move further away. And over time, you have the boomers up top where they're overlapping in their politics. And then as they age out, what happens is the children of these generations that are hyperpolarized will be entrenched and be completely separated. The one thing that could bring us together is growing up around each other. I learned that growing up on the south side of Chicago. But right now what's happening is that the children of millennials, albeit very few, to be honest, are growing up completely detached from the other side and assuming the worst about each other. They're going to grow up and they're going to say all conservatives are evil baby killers. And the left is going to say, what you think we are, you're the evil baby killers. You want abortion. And they're going to say, you want guns. There will be no unity, and there will be only tribal animosity. Perhaps we can get some kind of Romeo and Juliet scenario where in the next generation, the children of Gen Z, a conservative and a liberal, are like, but I love you, and then they come together. I don't know about that. I can only see dramatic escalation. But there you have it. Again, I don't care for the petty drama. I don't care. You can say whatever you want, dude. I wish Ethan was a bit more honest. I have no problem showing his context. Apparently, he's not interested in showing mine. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.